Welcome to the Internet of Things Security Institute podcast. Privacy Matters with Nicole Stevenson.
Today's podcast is going to be really interesting because we're talking about something that a number of our listeners have been agitating to hear more about. Yes, we're still focusing on privacy for smart cities, but we're looking at it from the angle of the data machine. In particular, the large data-driven companies that rely on the personal information of citizens in order to keep their businesses alive and thriving. My guests today are Tsopanis and Sophie Payne. Along with being the CEO of Join Social Media, a replacement for Facebook built on blockchain technology, JT is a cat person, a tea drinker, and a barstool philosopher that believes the democratization of data will solve the root of almost all evils. When he's not debating competitively in universities and bars around the world, JT is figuring out how to bring down the disinformation machine that he believes poses an existential threat to Western liberal democracies and open societies globally. Sophie Payne is Join's Chief Product Officer, a doctor of cognitive neuroscience, a data scientist, and she's also a cat person. Sophie's currently developing Join Kids, Join's social media platform specifically designed for young people under 13 years. Sophie loves the internet and its huge potential as an educational resource. That's why one of her ambitions for Join Kids is to offer free online courses for kids in digital skills. She's all about helping children develop the skills they need to truly participate in the digital world. In the privacy space right now, the combined voices of JT and Sophie are encouraging us all to think about the kind of world we want to live in. John and Sophie, welcome to the show.
Hello, Nicole. It's great to be with you.
This is such an exciting time for privacy in both our parts of the world. I'm sitting here in Australia and you're across the pond in Greece, I think.
Yeah, we are. It's 24 degrees here right now, and it's pretty good.
Look, today, as you know, I wanted to talk quite a lot about what's happening in the privacy space in our smart cities. And I feel that worldwide right now we're seeing our national and state level governments put smart cities on the agenda, right? This is good. And this includes buckets of money that's potentially being made available to our local governments under banners like innovation and global connectivity and public-private partnerships and things like that. Now, on the surface, I think this is great. It's governments investing in their communities, right? But then the wheels fall off for me, because what I'm not seeing is a great deal of attention at the funding stage to privacy. Instead, what I'm seeing is cities applying for funding, partnering with industry, buying the best technologies the money can bring, and then moving headlong into deploying those technologies before they have their privacy ducks in a row. Now, you can imagine for me as a privacy professional, this sets my teeth on edge. Now, should our national and state level governments be doing more here? Should there be a requirement for cities to have basic privacy building blocks in place before they can access funding?
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't just a side concern, it's a pressing issue. We think that the smart cities, if they were implemented today, as these public-private partnerships have been announced, we think there'd be an existential threat, not just to privacy rights, but to all civil rights. We stand at a point where the power asymmetry between the tech companies and the governments is already at a breaking point. And the problem with the model for smart cities is that they are always on. Now, before all citizens have developed an informed expectation of control of their data, and specifically before the infrastructure that can implement meaningful consent controls is operational, and we can talk a bit about blockchain and what that means for user consent in a second. Before those mechanisms are live, before users have direct control over their data going into these systems, the model for smart cities is an irreversible and existential threat to all privacy rights as they are currently being designed up. And I think to understand that statement, we need to kind of understand what a good smart city would look like. And we know that with the emergence of blockchain technology, with the emergence of secure decentralized ledgers, that we can create individual wallets for citizens to engage in the digital economy and to ultimately engage with smart cities. That mechanism would rely, in a perfect world, on all the data that is collected about you in real time being accessible to the citizen through a portal on a secure decentralized ledger, so that they can have consent and control over the data insights that are collected about them in a smart city. Before that infrastructure exists, before citizens have that expectation of data control, the implementation of smart cities by unaccountable American tech companies who are already kind of kowtowing the regulators it is a massive threat to all of our civil rights and responsibilities, because we're going to be building these smart cities on an infrastructure that's not yet ready, and that these companies know they can take advantage of, because citizens do not yet have that expectation of data ownership and control. And that's something we know with the emergence of blockchain technology is going to become the status quo in the next 3 to 5 years. So we think those projects, as they're being dreamed up by Google, Amazon, and Facebook right now, are incredibly dangerous. We think that there needs to be essentially a block stop on these smart cities. And we need to integrate a private by default model for the creation of smart cities that says always on data collection on every single citizen is the definition of a surveillance state, is the definition of irrevocable erosions of privacy rights. And until we create a system whereby each data insight can be consensually released and incentivized for release by consumers, if we don't have that mechanism in place, these smart cities are a threat to all of us.
This is a challenge, right? Because we're talking about almost reversing this forward motion and this propulsion headlong into the digital economy that we're seeing with a number of our cities.
There are elements of smart cities that are using this solution. So when we talk, the smart city solution for automated cars rely on the creation of these secure blockchain wallets, because the security level needed to operate an autonomous vehicle is incredibly high. So there are elements of the smart city design in certain areas, such as infrastructure with the automated car technology, that is bringing this technology that's needed to be at the core of a smart city infrastructure to life. So that is a positive thing. The problem is, specifically with Google, specifically with Facebook, specifically with Amazon, the models that they are designing and pitching to the public, to the government bodies, is an always-on data collection model. When you have those conditions for consent and those secure wallets, the model that needs to be designed for those smart cities is a consensual data release model by citizens and the creation of incentivization structures from the people operating those smart cities to get people to consensually release their data. So there are elements of the technology that are secure and that can be used, but they are not at the core of the business model. The core of the model, the smart cities being proposed, is an always-on surveillance state. That's where the profitability comes from. That's what all of their revenue models are based upon. That is a violation of all of our privacy rights at a mass scale. And until the active collection of consent for specific data insights is integrated into the core of the smart city model, those proposals aren't worth the salt that they're printed on.
We see some of these consent-based models now popping up. You know, I have a colleague here that has a great model that could be deployed in our cities, or at any level of government, really. That's about choice and control. It's a specific opt-in model in terms of I'm happy to have my data used in a particular way. What's interesting, though, is that it almost seems that regulation and our governments are not ready to catch up with this idea that choice and control may not be the flavor of the month from the government perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's the point of compromise. So the Irish Data Protection Commissioner, who was responsible for regulating Facebook's activity in Europe, for 2020, they've been given a £16 million budget. Facebook makes $16 billion every 90 days in profit. So the regulators are not only underfunded, but they are essentially at the mercy of the large American tech. And when you talk about power asymmetry, that's the power asymmetry. The annual budget for the Data Protection Commissioner responsible for regulating the practices in Europe is being funded 100 times less per year than Facebook makes in profit every 90 days. So we cannot expect there to be a reasonable negotiation between the public sector bodies here that are negotiating with these massive tech companies in creating a model that ultimately delivers values to citizens, because those companies are operating on for their own profit motive. And we know the reason that Facebook is a $1 trillion company is because once they can collect the data, once Google collects the data, they can sell it to tens of thousands of third parties, unlimited amounts of time, because information is replicable. And so data ownership here, when we talk about data ownership, we know that the conditions for consent when using Google and Facebook, they violate the GDPR, they violate the spirit and necessary conditions for consent, because ownership of your data looks like real-time control and real-time information feeds for what data is being collected about you. That system is not currently in place within Google or Facebook. That system has not yet been implemented in almost any kind of major tech company. That portal, when we talk about privacy UI, understanding what data is being collected about you from which smart city devices in real time, that portal that each citizen should have access to doesn't yet exist. The model for Google and Facebook is to harvest all this data, to sell it out to tens of thousands of third parties, and to monetize it within their own ecosystem. That means that the citizens, who are ultimately the data subjects, are not the real owners of their data. The real owners of their data, once they've released that data, are these big tech companies, and they do not have active and real-time methods of control to leverage and to restrict who has access to it. So we challenge we think that a tick box consent to say, I opt into smart cities, and as you go around the day, thousands of different devices can collect thousands of different data points on you and sell them to tens of thousands of different third parties. If you're not seeing any of the value from that, if you're not seeing the real-time information flows about what data is being collected and why, then the definition of consent does not meet the definition of consent. It's null. And I think that's what we need to do here, is reimagine the concept of what legitimate consent is and what a legitimate consent model is. And so these consumer portals that you'd have to create on these blockchain technologies for real-time access to data, for real-time releasing of data insights, that is not what these smart cities are proposing at all. The smart cities are proposing that citizens that opt in, tick a box, and then continuously, always on, from thousands of devices to tens of thousands of third parties, that data can be monetized ad infinitum. And remember, when we talk about the problem here, the problem is already a power asymmetry between Google, Facebook, and governments, between the resources that they have, the lobbyists that they have, and the government's able to regulate them. That power asymmetry is already at a breaking point. And if you allow them to build a physical infrastructure in the heart of every city that is always on, not only is that power asymmetry going to get exponentially worse because the amount of data they can collect becomes exponentially larger, you've built a physical industrial complex secured by physical security that cannot be removed. So if you've played any authoritarian, dystopian, futuristic video games like Borderlands, the problem with like the really evil, like the Hyperion fascist regime complex is you have to physically dismantle the infrastructure in order to give power back to the citizens. And the same thing is going to happen here. It's not like a normal company where if this goes wrong and we find out they're doing stuff with the data, you can remove your custom, take your business elsewhere, and the system crumbles. The system, once it's built, the physical infrastructure, once it's implemented on those models, makes itself exponentially richer and cannot physically be removed. It is an existential threat that consumers, once it has been built, will fail to be able to opt out of. And at this specific point in time, when that blockchain technology doesn't exist, when the expectation of data ownership and control doesn't exist, and the power asymmetry between these massive tech companies and the governments is laughably large, we cannot even, the idea of allowing them to build inside of our cities is incomprehensible, and we need to treat it as severely as the threat that it is.
So I want to talk about social media logins, right? We've all seen them. Practically every app or account out there gives you an option to log in via Facebook or connect to us via Instagram. Now, in a city's context, I see this as a dangerous approach to citizen engagement. So, for example, when you travel to most major cities, there's increasingly this option to access the local government's free Wi-Fi service. So you select the city's Wi-Fi network, you provide some details about yourself, and off you go. But it's not actually that simple, is it? A huge number of our cities use Wi-Fi service providers that will encourage their patrons to log in using their social media accounts, which to me screams a privacy risk. What do you think is going on here? And do you think it's risky business for our cities?
I think all your listeners will be aware of what happened with Cambridge Analytica and how they scraped millions of people's personal information from Facebook and then created these psychological profiles for which they then used to target them. So when you're logging in with Facebook here, you're essentially connecting all of that information about you to physical information about what you're doing in a city, so where you are. Potentially then companies can infer who you're meeting, what you're doing, and this is a huge privacy risk, and I think we've learned this already and we should take those lessons forward.
And what we found is that the solution to this is just what I was saying about the autonomous car network, which is on secure blockchains, you create individual wallets, and you need those wallets, individual, highly authenticated access points for individuals to access certain services. To access a certain service, if it's a security reason to verify that that person exists, then to do that, you should do it through a specific authentication mechanism, so either a digital ID verification provider, or in this case, because we are talking about smart cities, and ultimately the way all citizens will engage with that new data economy will be through their own private individual crypto wallet, their own secure wallet on the blockchain. That will be their access point to a whole variety of digital services. So, for instance, there are already organizations that are doing this. So, for instance, SecureKey in Canada, their digital ID verification process is primarily to allow people to access financial services. So once you have an authenticated account on their system, you can then access a range of quite highly verified different services within the economy that require high levels of authentication. Social media, as it currently stands, requires the least amount of social verification possible. You can buy fake Facebook accounts online for 9p a pop. Facebook deleted 2.3 billion fake accounts in the first 90 days of 2019. So that system is not secure. The digital ID verification procedures of current social media platforms aren't secure. But we do understand with smart cities that the blockchain and decentralized ledger technologies will allow the creation of secure individual wallets that users can use to access a variety of services. And so any smart city that is serious about privacy would require that level of authentication to engage with any type of data economy service that's public, or else, as Sophie said, those risks there of the psychological profiling, the micro-targeting that is incredibly pervasive and powerful and dangerous becomes our continued reality.
I want to pick up on Sophie's commentary a little bit. I'm a tiny bit worried about what happens to the people in our cities that are less connected to the city for whatever reason. So people who have an issue with homelessness, or perhaps they speak a different language than is normally spoken in the city, or perhaps there's a level of intellectual impairment or physical disability, or perhaps we're talking about children or the elderly. What concerns me about our move into the digital economy and the pace at which I'm seeing smart cities develop is that many of the solutions that we're talking about in terms of really engaging citizens in their own outcomes, they involve technology. But how are we going to get our citizens there? All of them, not just the people like you and me, or the individuals who have ready access to technology or have the ready ability to understand the technology. What do our cities and our governments need to do in terms of uplift there? Like, I know that's a big question, and I didn't ask you to prepare for that question, but this concerns me because I can see a whole group of people being left behind, and perhaps as a result, being captured in this negative smart city context, when really these types of cities are supposed to be designed for social benefit.
We recognize, obviously, that we're moving forward, right? We're becoming a more digital world. So what our governments need to do is invest in digital literacy programs, specifically for those types of people, so kids, so that, they're growing up, they're using technology every day. They need to be taught, they need to understand how their data is being used, how they can take control of their data, their information, how they can best utilize those digital services. And then we also need to, the other marginalized groups that you talked about, so people who potentially are less able to use technology or less able to understand it, they also need investment to help them to access these services.
And I think, so technology here can actually be a great equalizer across income and class divides. When we talk about accessing these portals, these smart cities that are going to be collecting data on everyone, if you design smart cities as public sector bodies should do, with the specific goals of improving the quality of life within those communities, those issues that you talk about specific illnesses in specific areas that don't have access to public services, areas that have high levels of homelessness. That data is data that can be collected by smart cities and can inform better policy from those public sector bodies to specifically address the root causes of people who are disenfranchised from those cities. So the power of a smart city, it can decrease the lag time between the discovery of specific social inequalities that exist within a cities and policies that directly rectify them. So if smart cities are designed with tech for good at their core, that engagement with the data collection process can be an equalizer because, even people in lower income inequality groups have access to smartphones or some type of technology so they can access these portals that we talked about. That can be a great equalizer. But if specifically part of the reason you're using that data is to inform good public policy to address the underlying causes of those inequalities, then these smart cities can work to uplift those lower socioeconomic classes and to alleviate specific issues that the smart city is able to identify.
And maybe our governments need to slow down. Is that what I'm hearing here? That we are just moving too quickly, that it's all about the tech and it's all about data. But it's actually not about the people that the cities are trying to serve.
Yeah, before citizens have a much clearer mechanism to access control over their data, before that infrastructure exists, and before the regulators have combated the already well-documented problems with the power asymmetry with the big tech companies, now is the wrong time to be launching these physical infrastructure projects that are basically, as I said, like impossible to physically remove. And that's the real concern here is the regulators and the public bodies are not in a safe space right now to negotiate with these American tech companies. Half of the politicians in Washington are in their pockets. And we need to give citizens secure private mechanisms to engage in that data economy before we build the infrastructure that's going to suck all of that data out before they can get the control over their own data. And I think that's ultimately the race that Google and Facebook and Amazon realize is once that blockchain technology is widely used and available in all business models, and Deloitte's latest predictions say that by 2022, most operating models will have moved to some sort of blockchain decentralized model. They know it's a race against time because once that expectation of control and security is out there, you can't put it back in the box. So that's why they are pushing incredibly hard to strong arm these cities with cash or whatever it is to build these cities really, really quickly, because once those operating models are in place and once everyone's got a piece of the pie and everyone within that kind of political ecosystem is getting paid from it, it'll be very, very, very difficult to remove.
This is another, I suppose, segue, but I think it's really relevant. So I'm a mum, right? I have 2 kids under 10. And it's occurred to me that I am raising the first generation of 100% digital natives,
Yeah.
right? So these kids have not grown up knowing anything else. And Sophie, I'm really interested in your perspective because I know you do a lot of work in this space and with kids. If we don't slow down, what we may be raising is a generation of kids who don't understand that there was another option, that there was another alternative to the idea that we could be in this mass surveillance society if our cities continue to progress the way they are. I'd like to hear your views on that.
So I think it sort of goes back to what we've mentioned before about this expectation of privacy. And so when I was saying earlier that government should invest in digital literacy, that is a huge part of that. So we should be teaching kids that they own their personal data, they should have control over it, and they should consent to releasing that. And a big part of that is understanding what that data is being used for and what purpose. So we really need to educate kids around that. So thinking about who's using their data, why are they using it, what are they gaining from it, and building in that expectation that, no, actually, they can revoke that consent for third parties to use that data. The data is their own and they have control over it.
Now, our listeners will recall from the introduction that you guys have engineered an entirely new approach to social media. But I imagine that there have been some barriers for you in terms of how we as a society have become quite accustomed to giving away so much of our personal information in exchange for this feeling of collective digital membership. What is it about the nature of social media that we as a society have failed to see?
I mean, the most important thing that we've missed is what we learned from the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which is what is the most malicious form of data usage that is possible on social media? And the answer to that is the ability for malicious third parties to scrape millions of people's personal data, to create incredibly in-depth psychological profiles of those people, and then to micro-target them with disinformation to cause deliberately apathy, fear, and division within societies. So we missed that. We missed that was, and it's not just like a side, we missed the core operating model of micro-targeting through social media and what that meant to specific rogue actors who could use that situation, that social media, to divide us all using tens of millions of fake accounts, micro-targeted disinformation and propaganda, and insane amounts of insights into your psychological profile to deliver it successfully. That model is what we missed on social media. But the great things about social media are the things that connect us, the friends that connect us, the pages we're a part of, the events that we're a part of, and the things that bring us closer together. So we missed the ability to give people specific content controls, to give people controls over the ads that they see and controls over the data that they release, because it's very difficult for people. So on Facebook, they don't give you don't have any portal to see every single advertiser that has your data. You don't have a portal to see exactly which ads you're going to be served with and why. And the reason is it's very profitable for them to sell that to the highest bidder. We missed that. And so what we need to do is to remove the power of those dark actors on the edges who can exploit that system from being able to do that. And by doing that, what we do is, we already have the Cambridge Analytica story. We know exactly what happened. It's been well documented. And so we just provide users those privacy controls, those content controls, those ad controls, to be able to filter out those bad actors and to make sure that they don't appear on social media. We digitally verify every account so that the fake account problem doesn't exist. We provide people with a data lake, a privacy control center where they can control which ads and which data they release. They can't be subject to the same type of campaigns that Cambridge Analytica ran. And I think just by solving those two main problems, the ability to amplify propaganda with tens of millions of fake accounts and the ability to psychologically profile and micro-target people, we solve most of the bad stuff on social, and we get back to the things that we love, which are cat memes and the Harlem Shake. I miss those days for social media.
And Sophie, what do you think? I know you focus a lot on kids and vulnerable populations, and what if we failed to see there?
I think what we failed to see is what we've missed out on is having social media that's specifically designed with those people's needs in mind. So if we're talking about kids need a safe space on the internet, because the internet wasn't designed with children in mind, and there's a lot of content online that is harmful to kids, not just things that are illegal, but just things that are upsetting. And kids, as we were talking about earlier, right? So the world is becoming a very digital place, and now we've got the first generation of children who are growing up completely in that space. Kids need to be able to use the internet. They need to have digital literacy. That's one of their rights. But they need a safe space to use the internet because it's not all appropriate for them. And this is really important in terms of social media, because we know that kids love to use social media. So there was that statistic that I've seen I think it's 8 out of 10 kids under the age of 13 have a social media account already. That's a crazy amount of children on potentially on Facebook, where we know that they can come across material that is harmful to them. So what I think is really important is that we have social media platforms that are designed with children's needs in mind. So this means age gating. So all the people on the platform are children. We know that. It requires parental verification and consent, because parents need to give consent for kids to use these digital services. And it means that these spaces are created so that the content on there is safe for kids. And this can be done in a number of ways. So using AI for language and content filtering, and also human filtering as well. So we want, adults to be on those platforms and monitor the content there. And I think, that's the important part, is designing these platforms specifically with those groups' needs in mind.
It's almost a level of humanity by design that seems to have just been filtered out of some of these larger conversations and the larger bodies of design work happening in some of our big data or big tech companies.
I think the problem is that the focus on the design in those companies is all around profit. It's not about people's experience and their use of these platforms. It's purely focused on profit margins. That's the problem.
Right. So it's almost lost the purity, hasn't it, of social connectivity in its truest form is about you and me connecting with each other in a meaningful way about stuff we care about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
And that profit motive exists most strongly at the extremes. That's why extremist content, like when you put kids on YouTube and, they're watching Peppa Pig and then suddenly there's a suggested video for an alt-right video and they go down a hole, it becomes increasingly extreme, is because these platforms, extremist content, clickbait, is the most profitable. It is, negative emotions and extreme headlines fast travel much quicker than truths and nuance does. And that motive, when it is exploited to its extreme, as it is on Facebook and Google, leads to a mass polarization of people as they go down essentially these algorithmic rabbit holes that become increasingly tailored and increasingly extreme to extract the most amount of profit from each individual. That's how the profit motive across those industries work. And so we think that the digital identity, your digital identity and the way you use social media forms a part of who you are. And you should have control over what type of person you want to be and what type of information you consume. And so we must, as a company, provide users that balance built in to prevent those extreme kind of algorithmic holes taking people down into those extremist places of the internet, because we understand that for all of us, like, neurodiversity is important for society to survive. So people need balanced information supplies, and that specific types of extremist content, whilst, on an engagement level might be profitable, there are other metrics we can build into the algorithm. So we've got a credibility metric that we're using external fact checkers for that will filter into how much certain types of content can spread. So it's not just like the most attractive, like which one's getting the most likes is the ones that's spreading. We need to create more balanced controls so that people are consuming more balanced information, and we're not just tempting them with really extremist content because that's the best way to get clicks on the platform. That's not a way to build a healthy society that has responsible public discourse. And so we're just going to put sensible content controls around it that people can exercise as they will.
I think that is a perfect segue into how can anyone listening to this podcast find out more about the work that you and Sophie are doing?
Well, you can go to our website, which is joinsocialmedia.com, and also follow us on Twitter as well,
which is @joinsocialmedia. And then, we're basically everything's on there. We've got we produced a 6-part series called Unhack the Great Hack. We did 6 episodes where we discussed specifically the 6 fundamental flaws in current social media's business model. So fake accounts, fake news, privacy, democracy, journalism, and join kids. And then what we do is spend about 10 minutes on each problem, and we show you what has happened over the last 5-6 years, specifically on Facebook and Twitter. And then what we do is we show you the join prototype and exactly how we've built controls in to address each of those 6 problems. So it's all on joinsocialmedia.com, and we've got some nice videos on there that kind of explain more from an educational point of view what the problems specifically are and how we've started to create systems of control that can kind of put them back in their box and make social media a better place for everyone.
Well, I will make sure that those details are made available in the show notes that are published along with this podcast. And I cannot thank you both enough for joining me today. It's been a wonderful conversation and nice to hear some frank and fearless views about what's happening in the world. There's not enough of that.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you as well.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you both.
The Internet of Things Security Institute supports best security and privacy practice in the deployment of Internet of Things technologies for smart cities and critical infrastructure. To find out more, please visit iotsecurityinstitute.com.